Sweet, welcome everybody. I'm just going to get started here. Thank you all so much for joining us today. This is the first of our winter webinar series. And for those of you who don't know, our winter webinar series, it's an annual series of informative webinars that we put on around this time every year to raise awareness around invasive species topics and to promote the action being taken on invasive species across the country. I'm particularly looking forward to this webinar because I used to be a youth coordinator for our old youth program, Youth Nature Keepers. So really excited to learn about this new batch of volunteers and hear about the amazing work that they've got going on in their communities. I'm going to pass things on to Amanda MacCarthy, the youth coordinator for the Ontario region for Youth Eco-Stewards. Amanda will introduce the Youth Eco-Stewards program and then pass things on to our three youth speakers, Sofia, Pravar, and Sultan, who will take things from there. Okay, I'm going to stop
Awesome.
sharing. And
Thanks,
Amanda,
Chris.
you're free to take it away. Thanks so much.
Yeah, so I'm just going to share a little bit about some of the work that we have been doing across Canada in terms of Invasives Canada's youth program, Youth Eco-Stewards. It's an initiative under the Invasives Canada umbrella, and you can learn more about it by checking out our website. And if you are under the age of 30 and are interested in joining, you can also find all the information for that there. But we've had a really exciting couple of months since launching our program towards the summer and fall of 2025. And the Youth Eco-Stewards program's goal is to empower and provide opportunities for youth across Canada to gain skills in their green careers and also support them through either funding or additional knowledge and support and networking in their projects. So we have some really exciting presentations that are going to be happening today from three of our incredible participants. As well, I just wanted to highlight an overview. In 2025, we had 13 projects be completed across 5 different provinces in Canada. And this was completed by a total of 26 youth volunteers, and they were able to interact with over 400 youth and members of the population in a couple events. So I'm going to highlight some of those projects, and then we're going to get to do an even deeper dive on some of the really cool work still happening. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is we hosted a Future Ready conference at Carleton University. This was coordinated by a youth called Hannah Vistuski, and she really wanted to do a project to focus on having youth share their voice and concerns about what the future looks like from an energy and sustainable impact lens. So there was different politicians and policymakers in attendance, and as well people to share advice with youth on how they could better ready themselves for careers in the green economy to make the impacts that they want. So this conference had almost 100 attendees, and it was a really amazing display. Different switching gears, Maya Sandalan discovered some Eurasian milfoil in her backyard on a BioBlitz that she was doing as part of our program, and she really wanted to know what impact this invasive species would have on her backyard. And so she actually conducted some experiments, specifically looking at some dissolved oxygen and doing some other pH and conductivity tests of the water, and discovered that where Eurasian milfoil was present, there was less oxygen in the water to support other life, such as fish and amphibians. And so she actually used this data to write a letter to her municipality, urging them to take stronger action against invasive species, and specifically asking if they would come to the marshlands by her house and remove some of the invasive species. So this was a really cool research project that we were able to support. And the final project I'm going to highlight before we get to do a real deep dive into our speakers was a native flower potting event hosted by Karina Chott. And this project's goal was really to just show people that like really small community actions can make a big difference and raise some awareness on the importance of planting native flowers in your gardens as opposed to invasive species. A lot of people don't really think when it comes to their ornamental plants that they might be having an impact on the wider ecology of the region. She really wanted to highlight this, and it was a super fun event where some people potted a plant for the very first time in their lives. They planted seeds for the first time ever. So that was really amazing. And these are just three examples of lots of projects that we have. But now we have a little bit of a different lens with our speakers coming up. All of them are students who have been doing research or either specifically around invasive species or around ecology, and they have some more long-term projects that they had pre-existing to us and that we are hoping that we might be able to support further. And so without that, I'll introduce our first speaker is going to be Pravar. Pravar is a master's student researching the spatial ecology of Ontario's native freshwater turtles with a focus on blanding turtle. He has a strong interest in understanding the spread of invasive species and their impact on sensitive ecosystems. He is currently working with Youth Eco-Stewards to study habitat limitations, for example, lack of deadwood and suitable basking areas in Toronto's wetlands. So basking platforms could potentially be installed to reduce competition between native turtle species and turtles from the pet trade. He is also a volunteer with the Michigan Gizaoshwin, the Turtle Protectors, an Indigenous-led stewardship program advocating for turtles in Tekaronto. And sorry if I mispronounced that, Pravar, you'll have to correct my pronunciation. So we'll have you go ahead and share a little bit about what you're working on.
Sounds good. And I did prepare some slides. I don't know if, yeah, I should be able to share. Perfect. Can you all see my slides in full screen?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Yeah. So hi, everyone. Yeah, my name's Pravar Joshi. I'll be presenting some slides today on Ontario's turtles. I kept the content very visual, and most of the photos are taken by me, and I cited the ones that aren't by me. Cool. So I'll give an introduction about myself, briefly go over the turtles who live in Toronto and the main threats they currently face. Then I'll discuss some of the impact of introduced species on turtles and a little bit of the history as well behind red-eared sliders specifically, which is a bit of a personal project of mine that I've undertaken recently. And I'll also talk about Phragmites. And then lastly, I will end with talking about my project that I've been brainstorming for Youth Eco-Stewards. Great. Yeah, so I'm a first-year master's student, so I think the other panelists are far along in their research journey. I just started a couple months ago, so everything is very early stage for me. And my research is going to be on Blandings turtles in Ontario. And I'm specifically working with conservation specialists across central Ontario and southern Ontario to identify movement barriers that they face when navigating through their relatively large range, which includes aquatic and terrestrial areas. I'm also doing an internship at TRCA, the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, as part of their geospatial data team. So in addition to academic work, I've also been volunteering with an Indigenous-led stewardship collective that Amanda mentioned. So they're known as Michigan Gizaoshwin, which roughly translates in English to Turtle Protectors. So I suggest you look up their website to learn more about the origin of the name and all the great work that they are doing. Most of the responsibilities that I have are around protecting turtle nests, and this typically involves getting a call from someone who sees a turtle on land, a volunteer being dispatched, sticking around with the turtle until she decides to lay her eggs, placing a protective barrier on top of the nest, escorting the turtle back to the water, and then in a couple of months, helping the hatchlings get close to the water as well, since this is all happening in Toronto, a highly urban wetland area. I also do all of their data collection. And then lastly, I'm a new member of Youth Eco-Stewards, so joined fairly recently and excited to expand my knowledge on invasive species and conservation more generally. So, all right, Ontario's turtles. I won't spend too much time talking about all of them because there might be people in here who know more about turtles, but just to give you an idea, we have 8 native species, with southern Ontario especially being a hotspot for them. All 8 of them are considered species at risk, with some being more threatened or endangered than others. My research, which again, I'm literally just starting like in the past few weeks, don't have a lot to share right now, but the focus is going to be on researching how connected the landscape is between nesting sites for Blanding's turtles and their overwintering habitat. So this is an especially important corridor for hatchlings who emerge in September, October, and have about a month or two to get to their hibernation spots. And this often involves crossing through habitat that isn't their preferred, navigating through roads. I also want to research how presence of invasive species might impact this movement and any other resistance that they face when navigating through their range early on in their life when they're quite vulnerable. So yeah, maybe by the next webinar, I'll have some insights to share. Yeah, and then when it comes to threats, as you could probably guess, the threats to turtles tend to be habitat destruction, road mortality, road operations, construction, poaching, predation, fishing, and disease. This is not an exhaustive list, but just to give you an idea. And in this video that you can see on the right, this turtle who I was with, she was nesting just a foot away from quite a busy road. And this is common throughout Toronto and many other parts of central Ontario. So you can see how vulnerable they are to getting hit by a car. All right, so moving on to Phragmites. So in the 2 seasons that I've spent doing stewardship work in Toronto's parks, I've seen the impact of the invasive strain of Phragmites. In my first year, I dominated the shorelines of this small pond that's close to my house, and just spending a lot of time in this area, I could see that there wasn't much wildlife. There weren't many other plants that were cohabiting with this dense species, and just didn't seem like an ideal place. And then thanks to a lot of labor-intensive stewardship work that the city and other groups did to remove this strain of Phragmites, you can actually now go there and see a lot of other native plants popping up, fish being seen. I've seen turtles navigating through this landscape, marsh birds hanging out. So it makes a clear difference. And specifically for turtles, for Blanding's turtles, it adds a movement barrier. For the smaller turtles, the eastern musk and spotted, it affects their movement even more significantly. And it also affects suitable nesting sites. So turtles have nest site fidelity. So if one year they come back to their nesting spot and there's a Phragmites patch that has popped up, they might still nest there, but the shade that is caused by the Phragmites is known to impact egg health. So not all Phragmites are bad, as I'm sure a lot of you know. The less dense native Phragmites strain is an important part of the ecosystem, and a lot of the guidance that we get from our experts when we're doing turtle conservation work is to actually release hatchlings where this less dense Phragmites is present so that they can hide from predators, because they're very susceptible to getting eaten by birds, fish, other turtles in their first year or two of life. All right, so moving on to red-eared sliders. So I wanted to discuss my own reflections of red-eared sliders and how this is kind of leading to some uh, research projects that I'm going to be doing on the side. So they are an introduced species in Ontario, and they're present in, I think, BC and Quebec, as well as many other parts of the world. They're an amazing reptile from northern Mexico and southern US area that is adapted to many different conditions that humans have unfortunately placed them in. So they were introduced around the world via the pet trade, specifically through people buying pets and not realizing their longevity, and then releasing them into local ponds. So here you can see a Toronto Star Classifieds posting selling turtles with a relatively low barrier to purchase, or only around $40. Not much else being described, just turtles for sale. Similarly, I thought this one was quite revealing of the times with a turtle ad nestled between a tripod jack and a vegetable juicer. So clearly not much effort being placed on talking about how to care for turtles. Similarly, grouping them under fish who have different care instructions, and then providing some interesting guidance that I wouldn't recommend on wild turtles. So not everything I came across was negative. I did see a lot of positive op-eds discussing what is the root cause of the spread of red-eared sliders, which is abandonment in ponds. So this is something that has been known for decades, not just by scientists, but regular people have also been picked up on why this has been happening. Um, yeah, and fast forward today, the prices seem to have gone up quite a lot, but the same classifieds ad has been transformed into a nice website. And notice the language that they're using here, saying turtles in stock, 6 units ready to be shipped. Yeah, the pet trade industry is really uh, been the source of the spread of red-eared sliders, and despite a lot of regulations, it's still sticking around in different ways. So I'm not dismissing that the impact sliders have on native turtles competing for habitat and food is trivial. In many parts of the US where they're not native, like Florida, they've had a significant impact actually on native turtles, and we need to make sure we don't get to that stage in Ontario. Um, but I think understanding the context and history serves as a good reference point on how the human-driven nature of invasive species spread plays a role. And there's a lot that can be done outside of field work and even research to stop the spread of red-eared sliders through, policies and laws. So, yeah, just wanted to highlight this. And yeah, this leads me to my Youth Eco-Stewards project. So these are some photos and stills from videos that I took over the past couple of years in Toronto. And you can see turtles crammed together, especially the top left one is a very tiny spot where I see turtles, knocking each other off to get to a spot where they can get their vitamin D, which is, necessary since they are ectotherms. Um, my hypothesis is there's not a lot of suitable deadwood or basking areas for turtles, and this impacts painted turtles, who you can see at the bottom photo, the smaller turtles, as they are much smaller than red-eared sliders and need to use the same basking areas. So in other parts of the world, this basking platform concept has been introduced, and I think it can be applied quite effectively in Ontario as well, where painted turtles are competing with red-eared sliders. So the hope is to prove the case that there isn't enough suitable basking areas in Toronto's urban wetlands, especially in some ponds near my apartment, and then make the case for installing these wooden basking platforms. And yeah, that's all I had. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much for sharing, Pravar. That was super interesting, and I'm glad I got to learn a little bit more about your work. And yeah, super excited to see what your research involves and like entails with the basking areas. And I know Kira and Pilar are really excited to support you in getting some extra basking areas put in. I'm just gonna have you potentially stop sharing. Oh, I think I just kicked you off. Anyway, oops. And I'm gonna introduce our next presenter, which is Sofia Panzetta. Sofia is a recently graduated master's student from the University of Alberta, where she pursued her Master of Science in Ecology in the Green Lab. She has several years of research experience where her interests have focused on reef fish habitat selection and marine invasive species, such as red lionfish, devil firefish, and European green crab. Her thesis examined the European green crab along the coast of British Columbia, combining field data from regional trapping programs with statistical modeling to explore how temperature changes under climate change and crab body size influence green crab impacts in order to inform future trapping management strategies. While exploring her next professional role, Sofia remains engaged in the conservation community through ongoing collaboration and volunteer work, particularly as the environmental education and grants manager or coordinator with Sierra Youth. In this role, she and her team have created a startup project to educate youth across Canada on environmental issues such as invasive species, waterway pollution, and pollinators, with pilot projects currently in Vancouver and Montreal. Funding for the project was received through the Youth Eco-Stewards program as a part of Invasives Canada. And these experiences reflect her passion for effective science communication and education beyond academia and to the general public. So I think Sophie is going to talk a little bit about her research, but we're so excited to hear more about that, and also for her to potentially share some of the really cool work her and the Sierra Club are doing. So I'll have her take it away.
All right, are you guys able to see my screen okay?
Yes.
Perfect. All right, well, like Amanda said, my name's Sophia. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, why I decided to choose to study and work with invasive species, talk about crabs, my passion, which is kind of just my thesis work for my master's, and then talk a little bit about what I'm doing within the Eco-Stewards program, and some of the stuff I've done with Sierra Youth. So about me, I'm from Vancouver, BC, but I decided to do my Bachelor of Science at the University of Alberta. So I did a double major in biology and psychology, but I did research in both. So with my biology major, I did a lot of reef fish work and then worked with marine invasives like lionfish, Oregon crab. And then with my psychology major, I worked a lot on child development and then how kids learn, which kind of ties into what I do with Sierra Youth. I decided I loved crabs so much, so I decided to do my Master of Science again at the University of Alberta, focusing about European green crab under climate change and how that affects trapping management. So that's just like kind of one aspect of my master's. And then I just recently joined, or I actually just recently graduated from my master's back in December. But I recently joined the YES program back at the beginning of January, where I'm starting a startup project with some other members of Sierra Youth that we'll get into a little more at the end of this. So why did I choose to go into the realm of invasive species? Well, I first got into them in my undergrad when I volunteered on a lionfish project. So this is lionfish. They're incredibly invasive in the Florida Keys. And I didn't know much about invasive species in general. So I found out that they're one of the leading drivers of biodiversity loss worldwide. And they disrupt so many things and can reshape entire ecosystems. And I found that so incredibly interesting, especially the fact that invasive species are kind of at the intersection of the science, people, economics, and just actual decision making. So I found that super, super fun. So with that lionfish project, we kind of looked at habitat suitability and preferences to kind of inform trapping strategies and help fisheries in Florida Keys, because lionfish don't have natural predators. I strayed away for a bit and did some coral reef work in the Florida Keys, kind of informing fisheries policy and MPA usage. But I realized I really like invasives, so I dove right back in and got into crabs. So it kind of just invasives just drew me in just because they're so dynamic. And if we can understand what makes an invader successful, we can better predict and hopefully reduce their impact. So actually, like, actual change was really what drove me to marine invasives. So the European green crab is what I focus my thesis on, and they are considered one of the world's most invasive species. So they're highly adaptable to a wide range of temperatures and salinities, and have been known to survive temperatures below 0 degrees, as well as upper thermal limits of 38 degrees Celsius. So they eat almost anything. They eat clams, mussels, small crustaceans. They will even eat each other. And they've been known to eat juvenile fish. So they have videos of them capturing juvenile salmon, which is very, very concerning. They reproduce very rapidly, with females releasing up to 185,000 eggs 1 to 2 times per year. And they're incredibly rampant across the coast of Canada and are kind of just here to stay. We can't fully get rid of them. So full eradication just isn't realistic. So we have to do something to mitigate those impacts, which is likely through removal. So my thesis asks that if removal is the best way to mitigate these impacts, it likely has to be ongoing, which is very costly. And because of that, it needs to be selective. So how do we decide where and how to focus efforts to reduce ecological impacts the most, especially under climate change and just changing ecosystems? So trapping is currently the main removal and management tool in BC, and it can reduce crab densities locally, but it's expensive, like I said before, and it has to be repeated continuously because the crabs recolonize so quickly. So it means we're always having to make choices about where to trap, how often, and how intensively, which is exactly where the science can help. So instead of asking how many crabs are present, my thesis focused on what drives green crab feeding across regions. So we wanted to see how much damage each crab is likely doing through total daily consumption and how that changes with temperature and body size. So it allows us to think about the actual impact and not just the presence of green crab. So why did I choose temperature? So the green crab's an ectotherm, and as such, it requires external sources to regulate their body temperatures. And at higher temperatures, their metabolic rate increases and increases their energetic demands, and thus would increase their feeding rates. And how about body size? So larger crabs are just going to eat more in total than smaller crabs. They have bigger bodies, bigger stomachs. But trapping actually plays a role in changing the average body size of a population. So traps are biased towards larger crab sizes. So the average body size of a population is going to be much smaller after trapping than it was before trapping because those larger crabs are removed from the total population. Additionally, as invasions progress, those size distributions often shift towards larger crabs, especially when trapping doesn't occur, just because the population is growing up and getting larger. So I'm going to do a SparkNotes version of my methods because this was a lot. So I ran 24-hour manipulative feeding trials at the Banfield Marine Science Center, located in Banfield, BC, within the traditional territory of the Hoya First Nations. So each tank had 1 green crab, as well as 3 different prey types, and then 12 of each prey type were placed in the tank. At the halfway point, we replaced any consumed prey to just make sure that resource availability wasn't an issue. And then the water in the tanks was heated or chilled to a pre-assigned temperature. So that video on the screen is just an example of the 37 terabytes of data I got that I used in my thesis, part of my second chapter that I won't be discussing. So we used a wide range of crab body sizes and temperatures, and we measured the crab's body size, the prey size, and how much prey was consumed within each 24-hour trial. So in total, I completed 152 different trials. Using all of that data, I ran a generalized additive model, so kind of just a predictive model to model total daily consumption as a function of average water temperature in degrees Celsius and crab carapace width. So that's the body size, not including its legs, in millimeters. Again, not going to get into the fun stat details, but it was a very good fitting model with a relatively high predictive accuracy. So using this model, I applied it to real trapping data from a trapping survey done through the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. And from this trapping data, we only chose 3 study sites. The first being the Central Coast, Barkley Sound, and Soup Basin. We decided to use only 2012 data as we wanted to see comparisons of invasion progression. So as we remember, More established populations that have grown will have a larger body size distribution. So we would expect Barkley Sound, which had the invasion in 1998, would have a larger body size, followed by Soup Basin, and then the Central Coast would have the smallest body sizes, as it had the most recent invasion in 2011. We also got temperature or water temperature from a long-term light station data from the government of Canada. So we then created 6 different trapping scenarios to kind of show changes under trapping scenario or trapping management, sorry, and climate change. So we started with our baseline, which was at 2012 temperature and the crab sizes for each region. And then from that baseline, we then had a scenario with a 2-degree increase to temperature, but no change in body size. And then, like I said before, trapping typically causes a body size decrease. So we expected not doing anything will cause that body size to increase and that population distribution to get larger. So we had a 30% size increase with no warming. And then our worst case scenario was that size increase with warming. On the reverse, trapping management would cause a decrease in body size. So our best case scenario was no ocean warming and a size decrease, followed by a size decrease with warming. I'll quickly go through these results. So the axis is just the predicted total daily consumption rate per crab. So we found that the baseline, which is that 2012 summer temp and body size, was largest in Barkley Sound. Again, to be expected because Barkley Sound had an established population in 2012. So average body sizes are bigger, they're just going to eat them. The first scenario of no size change, but with a temperature increase, showed an increase from the baseline feeding rate of 10 to 20%. The second scenario under a body size increase and no temperature change found an increase of 40 to 50% from the baseline. So compared to just temperature alone, it's a way larger change, indicating that body size is a much larger driver. Scenario 3 was our worst case scenario and had both that temperature change and body size increase. And there's an increase of 50 to 70% from that baseline, followed by our best case scenario where no warming and just a body size reduction. And that decreased by 40 to 50% from the baseline feeding rates. And then scenario 5 was both that temperature change and that body size reduction. But you can see that even with a temperature increase, by decreasing body size, it's still very under baseline. So it's showing that size is the biggest driver. And these results are also showing that well-established populations, such as Barkley Sound, are going to be hit the hardest in the future. However, you need to think about it in the actual lens. Barkley Sound already has a well-established population. So this future prediction isn't really accurate. The body sizes of the crabs really can't get much bigger than what they're at. So it kind of is emphasizing that areas that have a newer invasion, like the Central Coast and Soup Basin, would show more realistic future scenarios. And emphasizes that newly invaded areas should have more focused trapping to prevent the chances of those populations from establishing. So quick results, warming and larger body sizes cause significant increases and trapping caused a decrease. So it highlights that trapping influences impact, not just abundance, by altering that population structure. And we recommended 2 things for trapping. So the first was region selective trapping. So we can optimize our trapping efforts and reduce future impacts the most by having increased trapping efforts in areas that green crab have not become fully established, as you can see from the previous results. And then body size was the biggest driver. So our second recommendation is size selective trapping. So strategies that reduce the average body size, like ongoing size selective trapping, could substantially decrease total predation, even under warming conditions. So there's an example with the lionfish, where reducing body size through targeted removals reduced the consumption rates of that population enough that the levels were sustainable for native species production. Of course, as always, more work needs to be done on this, but that work's currently being done by myself and in my lab. So all of this kind of made me realize I really want to make actual tangible impacts to things. And it kind of led me down the path with Sierra Youth with that desire to make a change. So I'll briefly touch on that. So I am the environmental education and grants coordinator for Sierra Youth. It's a volunteer role. I've been doing it for the past year. So I've kind of just been heading our education program. So I've talked to over 20 classrooms in Alberta, but it's just me. So I'm just going around Alberta talking to classrooms, and it's quite hard. So myself and two other executive members of Sierra Youth decided to create kind of a startup project and receive funding from the Youth Eco-Stewards program. So now we're able to actually make this a lot bigger and a lot more impactful than just me driving around the highways in Alberta, going to different schools. So right now we have a pilot program currently in Vancouver and Montreal, and we're hoping to educate on invasive species because I know I didn't know anything about them, and they just have such a big impact, as well as waterways pollution, pollinators, and so many more things. So currently we're focusing on elementary school classrooms, but the hope is to go into larger community workshops and kind of expand. But that's dreaming big, and hopefully we get there within the next year or so. But that is everything. If anyone is in this kind of educational realm or has suggestions, I would love to hear from you. But thank you for listening to me. That's my email, and then that QR code is to my lab to see sort of the work that we're doing and some of my work. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. It's always so great to have you present, and I'm really excited to see what that pilot project can turn into in the next couple months. And then our last presenter for today is Sultan. Sultan is a PhD student currently working at York University. They have a background in conservation, aquatic ecology, and urban agriculture. They have a deep spiritual love for nature and all of life, especially fish. Sultan is also a writer working on personal projects, and they love to box. So they're going to share with us a little bit about their work at the York University lab. And as a person who also loves fish, I'm really excited to get to hear what they're going to share.
Hi, I'm just going to go ahead and share. Hi, I'm gonna keep this very casual just because I want this to be an introduction, and I know a lot of people don't love goldfish as much as I do, so we're just gonna keep this as casual as possible. So we're just gonna talk a little bit about me, and then a little bit about goldfish, and then a little bit about the research. So just a little bit about me. So I did my Bachelor's of Science at the University of Waterloo, where I actually studied plants for most of my degree, and then I studied diatoms for my thesis. During my master's, I actually did an internship at the ROM. So I was the first intern under the climate change department, and I was working on the lake selected for the golden spike for the Anthropocene, which in other words, basically means that the lake, also known as Crawford Lake, was selected as the site for geological evidence of a human impacted era. So it was known as the Anthropocene, the era for humans, right? The era where humans were changing things. I was specifically looking for phosphorus levels in the lake sediments to track like human-led eutrophication over time. So we basically had like a huge core, and from that core we had different depths of the samples, and throughout the different depths we're looking for different spikes or different levels of phosphorus, which I would prepare from like sediment, and we would look through like some very, very expensive microscopes. I did this research while I was actually doing my master's, which seemed like a great idea, and it worked out, but that meant that it was 6 days a week at two different labs. So it wasn't always easy, but definitely worth it. So after my master's, I actually worked at the zoo as a reproductive science technician, where I processed caribou hair and fecal samples. That's right, I processed fecal samples so that their pregnancy hormones can be monitored across populations. Lastly, I also have a really long background in urban agriculture. So I spent my first couple of years working in gardens and urban farms. That eventually translated from urban farms to an actual farm. So after I finished working at the zoo, I actually spent some time working as an eco-agricultural intern at a farm outside of Belleville, which is where these pictures are from. So the way the cows are looking at you in the picture, that's how the cows were looking at me the entire time. But anyway, I've been dancing around it. I'm really here to speak about my master's work, which is kind of ongoing. So my master's background is in invasion biology and aquatic ecology, specifically invasive goldfish. So goldfish are part of the cyprinid family related to carp and koi fish. They originate from southern China, specifically the Yangtze River Basin, where they were first domesticated, and they have been domesticated for over 1,000 years. I'm sure a lot of you have seen like variations of different kinds of goldfish in the pet stores with like bubble eyes and things like that. Yeah, that's been going on for some time. They so throughout the 1,000 years, they have been traded globally as ornamental pets. That's how they were first kept, and that's why they were first domesticated. They're domesticated, so that color, that orange color, is actually a natural variation that happens among their like ancestor carpfish. And then that was seen and bred for because that color was seen as a royal color at the time. Now that they had been domesticated for 1,000 years and they've been traded globally for 1,000 years, they're in every continental water except Antarctica. So they're one of the most well-known fish in the world. They're also one of the most invasive fish in the world. Eventually, they reached North America in the 1800s and they kept growing in popularity, meaning that more and more people kept releasing their pets into the waters, which is unfortunate for us because these little guys, okay, not little, but these guys are really, really good at surviving. They are hardy. They can withstand severely cold temperatures and they can withstand a lack of oxygen. They also compete with other fish. They eat frog eggs, and the way that they eat is that they like spit up the lake floor benthos and then they spit it out. So it creates a cloud and it decreases the water quality, which is really bad for the macrophytes or the aquatic plants that are around. And as you can see right here, I call this Godzilla Goldie. They can get very, very big. So they can be a problem with their body size and they can also be a problem with their biomass. So this one here has been swimming in one of these bins that we had in the lab, and I kid you not, I had to hack off its head with an actual saw. So about the research. So Hamilton Harbor is connected to Lake Ontario, if you can see here. I don't know if my mouse shows, but do you see the black point where it says RBG? So that is where the first of my lake samples were from. So Hamilton Harbor is connected to Lake Ontario, and goldfish were first detected there after carp were in the 60s. So carp had been the bigger problem for a longer time. So the focus was on managing carp. But in the 90s, it was found out that traps that work for carp don't necessarily work for goldfish. So while those traps were actually decreasing the carp population, they were increasing the goldfish population. So that was back in the 90s, and that kind of sounded an alarm for how big of a problem goldfish were becoming, especially because they couldn't be treated like their cousins. So Hamilton also has a lot of man-made ponds connecting to the lake, meant for stormwater management, where goldfish are also found. And sometimes this is connected to the number of pet stores around in the neighborhood. So there was a little bit of a DFO project with my lab where we were tracking how many pet stores were around how many man-made ponds and the number of goldfish within those ponds. Anyway, I had two populations of goldfish, one from the harbor, specifically in Coots Paradise, and the other one from these urban ponds. We called it Pond 220. As you can see, so that distance is actually the distance between like Scarborough and Etobicoke. It's not that far. And the objective was to determine their growth rates, body sizes, and reproductive potential, and then compare them to see if there are any differences. Differences would mean that each population is adapting to the environment that it's in, which would mean that goldfish as populations can adapt, and for an invasive species, that is a very strong advantage. So to do this, I created a maturity scale of the gonads and then determined their ages through otoliths. So this is the maturity scale. This took so many dissections and 2,000 pictures through the microscope. That is not an exaggeration. It was 2,000 pictures. There's two versions of this. So this is the photographic version, and then there's a written version of the stage, the state, and then a description to determine how mature the ovaries are. So you can see that from stage 1 is an immature ovary, it's not ready to lay eggs, and then stage 4 is when it's ready to lay eggs, stage 5 is when it's already spent. You can actually see some of the eggs, if you notice, in stage 4, they're like bright orange and like they look like yolk, which is kind of gross. But we also found was that sometimes half the ovary would contain smaller ova and the other half would contain much more developed ova. So if you look at stage 5, you can see that like on the top, you see like this dark, ready to like turgid kind of like look. And then below it, you see more pink and more like puffy kind of look. And one of those is that the eggs are ready to come out, and the other half is that the eggs are not ready to come out, which means that goldfish can batch spawn. Batch spawning means that you can release eggs at one point and then release the next set of eggs at another point. So this again is an advantage that goldfish have when it comes to being an invasive species, because they don't have to spend all their eggs at once. They can release their eggs at different times. I also want to say, I don't know if you guys know this, but goldfish can actually reproduce asexually. It's called gynogenesis. It's a form of asexual reproduction, but basically they can have clones of female goldfish. And there have been populations in Europe that have documented just all female, like nearly almost female goldfish. What's interesting about my research is that my samples were also almost completely female. I want to make it very clear that I'm not suggesting that they are asexually reproducing in the populations that I have. There's no way to know that right now, but I am saying that there are connections and considerations to be had. This was my bread and butter. These are otoliths. Otoliths are biominerals found in most fish. So they are actually purely calcium carbonate. They literally are minerals, but they're formed and they exist in the brain. For fish, they have 3 pairs, and these are 2 different kinds of the pairs. So on the left, you have an asterocyte, and then on the right, you have a lapillus. I also want to make a point of saying that humans have a version of otoliths ourselves, and they actually help with our own neurophysiology. But with fish, you can use these otoliths and you can use them to age them. They actually work a lot like dendrochronology, where you can age tree rings. So if you look at these pictures here, I don't know if you can tell, but you can see alternating bands between light and dark. So you can see that's between the seasons of like calcium deposits between summer and winter. So one band of light and dark is 1 year. So these fish actually get quite old. What we found was that the pond population grows a lot slower. So the lake population has a faster growth rate. So when I was dissecting the fish, I was also getting their length measurements. And we graphed that across their ages. And we found that the growth rates are different between pond and lake populations. We also found that the pond population has fish that are older than the pond themselves, which suggests that they were deposited there. We also found that the lake population is much older. So some of the fish that I was aging were my age. They were like 26. So some of these goldfish and I are part of the same generation. Further, it was found that the pond population had a worse condition, so meaning that like they tended to be much smaller, and they didn't tend to be very big and buff. As you can see, they were not like Godzilla Goldie, they were much smaller than that, but they had a higher reproductive potential. So there was a difference. The lake population was growing faster, it was getting bigger, but it didn't have the reproductive potential that the pond population did, which suggested that there are differences between the pond and the lake populations. In fact, they seem to have a difference in trade-off in energy. So the lake population would had a trade-off in energy from their reproductive potential to their somatic potential. So they were investing more in body development than gonadal development. So their strategy was, I have a lot of predators around me. I have to get big really fast. And I have to get very big so that I can ward off these predators. I'm going to focus more on this than having babies. Whereas for the pond population, it was like, I'm in a tight space. I don't really have predators. I don't really have a lot of interactions with other species. So I'm going to focus more on, there's also, I'm getting like a runoff and pollution. There's not a lot of ways for me to invest in my body. So I'm going to focus more on having as many kids as possible than on getting big and buff. So different stressors meant different strategies. So I just want to reiterate like how much I love goldfish, because the reason for this is like they're amazing, right? They've been domesticated for 1,000 years. They're everywhere. They can withstand the cold. They can withstand lack of oxygen. They can reproduce asexually. They can adapt to their, and we just showed that they can adapt to their environments. What can't they do? So, which is really unfortunate for us, because now we have to ask ourselves, well, what is a viable solution in the goldfish problem, right? Is eradication really possible? Probably not. That's not realistic. So what is possible when it comes to managing goldfish? And a part of that is more awareness around pet release. But we talked a little bit about that during our conference, and that can be a little difficult, right? Because sometimes people don't have other options when giving away their pets. Another thing is stormwater management, right? Like if people aren't releasing their pets, those ponds still connect to those lakes. Those fish can still swim their way back and forth from pond to lake or lake to pond. And they do that. So, and now we are also seeing that different populations require different management. And if there are asexual populations out there, then how do we manage those as well? I do want you to be rest assured that the DFO is on it, that I actually did a contracting work for the DFO aging their fish. And I want to give some people hope that those kind of weird jobs exist. I mean, my family wanted me to be a doctor and I'm cracking open fish skulls, but that happens sometimes. And I'm hoping with continued work with the DFO and also continued work with a YES project in addressing these questions with the goldfish can make some headway, or at least provide some insight in how to manage such tough survivors. Also, I'm finishing my paper, so hopefully that's just a step for me. That's not for anybody else. Yeah, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Sultan. That was super interesting. And I'm super curious to get to see that paper when it's finished and hear what your next steps are. So I think that wraps up our youth process of the presentation. Chris will pop back on and maybe do a closing.